So with that, 15 minutes in, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin and Julia, who are going to talk to us about how they built their single-family home portfolio.
Awesome.
Any questions there, actually, before we transfer over? All right, great. Kevin, Julia, floor is yours. I'll monitor the chat for you guys,
Perfect.
and
Yeah.
people can drop their questions in there. If it's on topic right at the moment, I'll try to judiciously interrupt you, unless you want me to hold all the questions to the end.
I was going to say, let's keep this very conversational. If someone asks a question, we know we have a slide on it later on, we'll definitely, just say that. But yeah, please feel free to interrupt us at any time. That's totally fine.
Yeah. All right, great.
Awesome. So let's get on to the next slide. Perfect. So a quick overview of what we're going to be discussing today, and the biggest takeaway from this agenda is we're going to start very high level, and then we're going to get deeper and deeper into
you might need to lean towards the microphone a little bit. It's not picking it up very well.
Is that better?
We'll change the setting. Is that any better?
Kevin, you're better, but Julia, you seem a little further away or far away still.
All right, we'll try one more setting. How about that setting?
Is that better?
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it closer.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so we'll go really high level. And then we'll dive deeper into more analysis and how we kind of run our portfolio today.
Hold on, before we jump in, I just want to make sure that we are using the actual microphone. Maybe that was the issue. Give me one sec. Snowball. All right, we'll see if that works. If for some reason you're having issues, definitely stop us and let us know.
So a quick intro to us. My name is Julia, again, originally from Long Island. The W-2 job that I still hold is in tech sales, and always just been very entrepreneurial. And I'm the more personable one in the group, and I highlight that because I'm the one that usually and does deal with the tenants on an as-need basis.
Yeah, and I'm Kevin Windauer, originally from the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts. I was a W-2 in a medical device company as an engineer, but recently switched over to more consulting for those companies, as well as project management for those. Very analytical, creative, the classic engineer. I can't spell, but I can make a great slide deck. So definitely close your eyes if you see any spelling mistakes. And then together we got married in 2022. We met at University of Hartford. We live in Boston currently. We have a dog sitting in the back here. We're fitness enthusiasts, pretty much at the gym every single day, honestly, whether it's just to walk on the treadmill and clear our head or just get outside for a walk. And then you'll notice throughout this presentation, we're very transparent with our numbers. If you guys have any questions, we are more than happy to share where we invest, exactly the streets, what we have ideas on. I mean, we're a big believer, and I have the quote there, rising tide raises all boats. There's enough for all of us to win, and I think we all can help each other. So don't hold back with any questions. We're definitely an open book.
Amazing. So just to add a little bit of credibility to Kevin and I, we started investing in a very interesting time of the pandemic, where it was a lot of cash offers, very competitive environment, but we still, if there's a will, there's a way, right? So we started with a 2-family home. The strategy we use for that is house hacking, meaning that we lived in the top floor and we inherited tenants in the bottom, which was a great entry point to get into real estate. A lot of people, feel like the barrier to entry is always, 20% down, and there's all these additional costs that come with it. But we were able to put 5% down doing that. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. Then eventually we ended up buying a single family home just a block or so away. That was a fully turnkey property. And then the next one was another 2-family, another full gut renovation. And Kevin's going to dive deeper into that process later. And then lastly, a single family home that was a completely full gut renovation down to the studs that we eventually refinanced. And again, we can talk more details on that later.
We're having real trouble hearing you, Julia.
Oh no. And you hear Kevin fine?
You want to speak, Kevin?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Let me switch completely off this. Maybe something's up with this microphone. I'll switch. Hold on.
I think it's just that you're leaning into it, to be honest.
It could be. Hey, let's try. This is a completely different microphone. Does that sound any better?
You have to speak, Julia.
All right.
Does that sound any better?
Sounds about the same.
You gotta
Okay.
use. I would say
So hey, let's get a poll in the chat here. Do we need to pause and work on the microphones a little bit? Say 1 if you want that. Say 0 if you don't. It's Intel here, right? Oh, we got a mixed group here.
I wonder.
Yeah, I think just lean forward might be the answer.
Okay. Is this better if I'm like literally right here?
Sure.
Perfect. I got
If it's not, I'm wondering if we just disconnect all this stuff and do good old fashioned. Let's see.
I don't think we need to do that. It was kind of a mixed response.
Okay, I'm gonna take my headphones out.
Okay.
Oh, Ed responded. It didn't sound like your microphone changed, and I kind of agree. It sounded identical. Both mics sounded the same. So
that's
maybe
weird.
maybe the mic didn't change.
Okay, is this
Okay.
is this a little bit better?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Perfect, guys. Thank you.
Hold on. Let's give us a second to reset here. I don't even know where our camera's at, but
Can you guys see us okay?
We can't see you anymore. Camera's
All right,
off.
Okay.
take this off. Just take it off.
We can see your screen though.
Sorry, guys.
no, I'd rather you guys tell us. Oh wait, that's why.
Perfect. We should be back on the screen, right?
There you go. You sound good now.
All right,
Amazing.
all right.
All right. Thank you, guys. Sorry about that.
No, I'd rather deal with it now than halfway through.
Perfect. Okay, so just to quickly paraphrase, yeah, this is our portfolio, and we can get back into it later. I just want to move on because of the mic issue. Perfect. So we weren't quite sure what the demographic of the room was and what everyone's experience is. But ultimately, real estate investing, you have quite a few different paths. There's your short-term rentals, which is, less than a month. They're fully furnished. You have your VRBOs, your Airbnbs. Next, in the middle, you have that medium-term rental, that 3 to 6 month. I don't know if you guys have heard of Furnish Finder, but it's a great place for traveling nurses. That's primarily the resource that they use when they're trying to find housing. And you can also do, corporate midterm rentals as well. And ultimately, what Kevin and I decided based off of our financial goals independently and as a couple is the long-term rentals, where you're typically having a lease for a year or more. They're not furnished, and that's typically where you would find them on Zillow, apartments.com, and all of that typical stuff, Trulia's, etc.
Yeah.
So a few reasons why we like long-term rentals. It's that stable and predictable income. You know what's coming in every month. You're signing your leases. You know what's coming and you know when it's going to end. And I say specifically less time consuming because there's this misconception about real estate that it's super passive. But that's really not the case. There's always going to be an element of your involvement, whether you have tenant turnover or you're deep into a renovation, or when the whole portfolio is humming, but you get that maintenance call that you're going to need to coordinate, for a handyman or a specialist to go out into the field and address the issue. Just a tried and true way of just getting into real estate. There's a lot of information on it, and it's kind of fail proof. There's fixed regulations and laws, meaning that if you choose to go the Airbnb route, those municipalities are always kind of changing those laws and you need to stay up to date. Whereas long-term rentals are usually pretty status quo. And there's just multiple ways to get that return on your investment. You have your cash flow, you have your appreciation, and over time, it's a very good wealth driver. And I will say before we move on, it's not that we felt that, you know, midterm rentals or Airbnb, that short-term rental game, isn't good. None is better or worse than the other. It's just a matter of what your personal goals are. And for us, it was the long-term strategy.
Cool. So this is how you actually get into this, right? There's so many different ways. This is what I like to call like your a la carte menu. There's so many things that are missing from here that we could add. But at a high level, we'll start from left to right. Your ownership structure. I mean, there's the classic syndication. I'm sure there's tons of people in this group that are part of syndications where that would be more your passive structure. And you can be involved, or at least it could be passive if you're just a limited partner. But that's a little bit different. We're not going to go into that during this presentation. There's partnerships. So you could go 50-50 with someone. Someone could bring the cash, you could bring the deal, or it could be a debt partner. And then there's the classic 100% owner. It's your cash, it's your, or it's your leverage, and it's your deal, and you are owning 100% of it. Financing, there's, again, so many different options. Hard money would be a short-term loan with, let's say, a private person who, you know, just is basically the bank. They're not an actual financial institution, but they'll lend you the money on maybe for 6 months to a year. Private money could be maybe is similar, but probably is someone in your family or friends or someone you just networked with and have a better connection with. You have your classic conventional banking. That's, I'm sure everyone or a lot of people here have used those, just classic big banks or Fannie, Freddie Mae, Mac mortgages, and then classic cash. We'll go into a few different strategies through the next. House hacking we've done, BURRs we've done, turnkey we've done. Value add is probably more similar to BURR than not. But again, there's different ways you can go about it. And then, of course, self-managing versus hiring internally versus property management companies. A big thing with that is where you're accounting for your in your deal analysis. So a property management company could be charging you 10%, and you want to make sure you're accounting for that when you're assessing a deal. So like I said, this is your a la carte menu. Choose your own path, if you will. You could have 100% ownership and with private money and do the BURR method and self-manage, or any of the other various paths you could go here. Probably the biggest thing people want to know is why, like your ROI. This is why we're all doing investing in the first place, whether you're doing stocks or whether you're doing real estate. So the biggest reason we got into real estate is because there's so many ways you make money in real estate. It's not just the cash flow. I think the media and the internet in general has sold this dream of like, get cash flow and live passively. And cash flow is very important, don't get me wrong, but the way I like to look at it is that's what kind of keeps you alive. That's what gets you through the 2008s. That's what gets you through the tough times when your furnace goes, when you need a new roof, when you need certain things. That's what cash flow is really there for. If there's some left over, great, even better. But real wealth is made in these other ways. Of course, there's principal pay down, where your tenant hopefully is paying the mortgage down every month. So even if you're breaking even, you're really not, because you're still paying down that mortgage. There's tons of tax advantages, whether it's simple write-offs, depreciation, which is huge in real estate, 1031 exchanges, which is essentially where you can take the value of or take the property you own, sell it, and buy a new property that is worth more, and not have to pay any capital gains taxes on that. So it's a way of transferring and selling one property and buying another without paying any taxes. There's a lot of rules and stuff around that. We're not going to go into too big of details, but happy to answer questions on that, the little bit I do know on it. And then becoming a real estate professional. This is something we've started doing. Last year, Julia didn't have a W-2 and she was a real estate professional, and we were able to take advantage of a lot of tax write-offs. We were able to write off my W-2 because I was a W-2 at the time. And as I mentioned earlier, I switched to more 1099 consulting gigs. So my primary role now is more on the real estate. I spend majority of my time throughout the year on real estate activities. So we're able to start writing off her W-2 income to the point where we in theory, could write off enough where she pays no taxes on her W-2. We pay no taxes on our rental income or any other income. Now, that's I guess a perfect world, right? If you write off everything, I'm sure, you better make sure you have a good accountant. You better make sure you're following all the rules. There's a lot that goes into that, but the point is real estate professional opens up a lot of doors, and that's simply just a tax status. If you're not a real estate professional, and I can let you know, or you can Google the things that allow you to be a real estate professional. But if you're not a real estate professional, you can't write off your W-2 income, or you can't write off certain things when it comes to real estate. So it just opens up a lot of doors. Another big part of wealth creation within long-term rentals, or a lot of real estate in general, is the leverage aspect. And this is a huge, I think, part that people don't necessarily understand, is why taking on debt can I end up making more money. And there's great graphics on Google you can look up on, using leverage versus cash. And there's definitely benefits to cash. Not saying that you shouldn't buy things cash, but there's also consideration for using debt and using leverage. For example, you can write off a lot of the actual interest for the tax advantages like we just talked about. But two, you could buy, instead of buying one property, you can now buy 5 properties. Let's say if you're putting 20% down on each of those properties, and increase your portfolio drastically, and have the opportunity of, your cash flow will be lower because you have debt, but your appreciation, the last one there, will be still the same on all of them. And that's really what I want to drive home, is this appreciation. Appreciation is what has skyrocketed our net worth. Cash flow has been great. All these other things have been great, but appreciation has, I would say, easily doubled our net worth in a matter of a couple of years. That's where the real wealth creation comes into play. And I will say that's not every market. We all know the historic of the real estate markets, whether it's 2008 or other times where it can go down and you shouldn't be banking on appreciation, but that's true for any one of these. The ideal long-term rental should have a bit of all of these. You should be not just looking for cash flow, because you're really not creating real wealth there with the appreciation. You shouldn't just be looking for appreciation, because then when your furnace goes, you can't afford to fix it, or your roof goes, you can't afford to fix it. So it's really a combination of all 5 of these that build your wealth, build your foundation, and can catapult you into that next financial bracket, or whatever your long-term goals are. So there's, again, driving home just the real wealth creation that real estate gives you, as opposed to a lot of other investments. Let's say your classic stock market investment, and I think the stock market's great. We're invested in the stock market, but you aren't necessarily able to take advantage of a lot of these other a lot of these other wealth creation methods that real estate affords you. We flying through this. Yeah, I want to make sure we have time for questions too at the end. So renovating, that's my specialty. That's where my lane, so to speak.
Would you like me to stop now and ask a couple of questions? We have a few in the chat.
Yeah. Let's
sure.
pause.
Yeah. So there was a little bit of a question about what BURR is and what it stands for, and what does that process look like?
Great question. I meant to say that when I went through it. So thank you for whoever asked that. So the BURR method, it's an acronym. It stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. And the idea is, I had to think through that one. It's a lot of R's, but the idea is you can buy a distressed property. You can use, in this case, we used hard money, and I'll go through an actual example of the BURR method in a later slide. But you can use hard money, which is a high interest loan, very high interest. It's a short-term loan. We get it completely renovated as fast as possible, get a renter in there, and then we can refinance into a traditional mortgage, the conventional banking aspect. And if you do it right, you could get into it for, if you 100% leverage it, which I'll talk about, you could get into it for 0 money and end up with actual equity in the property at the end of it. Or you could cash out refinance and take a lump sum of money. A lot of cases, people are taking out $20, $30, $50,000, sometimes more, and rolling that into your next deal. So now not only did you pay yourself back with that refinance, but you were able to get a lump sum of cash, hold that property that you just BURRed, and go buy a new property. That method, I think, is losing a little bit of steam in this current market with the high interest rates. It was a huge thing probably the last 10 years because every couple months rates were dropping, or every couple of years the rates were dropping. So by the time you finished a rehab, the rate was even lower. So it was even better. That being
that
said,
was actually the next question from Dawn is how are you doing it with the current interest rates?
Yeah, it's a challenge.
The short answer is find better deals. Buy them right. I know that's not an answer people want to hear. There's no magic sauce to it. And again, I'll go over an exact example of what our most recent one where we did it with a 12 or 13% rate. It's not you're not going to pull out as much money, but you'll see how much we made off of that once we get to that slide.
Yeah. And just to add one quick thing, that's if you're going into it with a BURR strategy, you really want to make sure that you're buying at the right price and you're not, overbuying just to quickly get into a deal because you don't want to miss out on something. Within the current interest rates, you really want to make sure that you're getting in at the right price and you're not just getting into a deal just to say, hey, I got into a deal.
Yeah. I like to think about it like if you can't do the numbers roughly in your head and make it make sense, it probably won't pencil out on paper. If you're splitting $1,000 or $2,000 just to make the BURR method work, you're going to eat through that $2,000 in the renovation because of some unforeseen thing. For example, in our most recent one, a week before the tenant was moving in, we were about refinancing, a $10,000 furnace blew. So that was in
the middle of winter. Their move-in date was December 1st on the East Coast. So as you can imagine, that was like a very big deal. I know we have a lot of West Coast people on the line. So I just want to emphasize how, that was crazy.
So like that's an unforeseen $10,000 expense. Now it still worked out because we bought it right. And again, I'll go through exact numbers of how that worked out. And maybe that'll trigger some more questions.
All right. And let's go through that example and let's go to the questions. Okay. Actually, there is one question about what does it take to become a real estate professional?
Sure. Quickly, again, I would talk to your accountant about this. One, you can't have a W-2. There are specific examples where people have done it with a W-2, but generally speaking, most accountants will tell you that you can't have a W-2 because the government wants to see that you are spending majority of your time, more than 50% of your time on real estate related activities. And that could be looking for deals, that could be renovating, that could be property management. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in this group that say, I do that already. And I felt the same way with my W-2. I spend more time in real estate than my W-2. But unfortunately, the government doesn't see it that way. And it's a very hard sell. So the answer to that is you can't have a W-2. I think the rule is 750 hours that you have to work on it a year. And then, I don't know, Daniel.
Yeah, that's it. 750 hours. And it needs to be more hours than any other job that you possess. Yes. So if you do have that W-2, it has to be less than whatever you spent on real estate.
Yeah. But there are great benefits. Like I said, like I was paying a ton of taxes on my W-2, and because Julia didn't have a W-2, she was able to qualify as a real estate professional, just being a property manager, honestly. And you can say we were able to write off a majority of my W-2 income.
And then strategically in the beginning, that was one of the reasons why we mentioned that I'm a W-2 now and he's a 1099, because that was a strategic move. And when you're building out your team, like our accountant actually brought that to our attention last year. So when we were thinking about, okay, we're going into 2024, that's why we ended up switching roles.
Yeah. But have that conversation with your accountant. Don't take our word. Like, definitely talk to them because they know your specific situation. And that's another reason, get a good accountant. There's not just your standard off the shelf accountant, a good real estate specific accountant. You will spend money for that. But if you're in a position to, I don't want to say afford that, but like in a position where your properties need that,
it's worth it.
It's 100% worth it.
And we have one question from Eugenio here, before we jump into your example, He wants
Yeah.
to know, what are your qualifications or minimum qualifications for your tenants?
Great.
Ooh, we have a slide on that. So let's
Yeah.
actually jump
Okay.
to that slide
We're
now.
going to get into all that. I'll quickly skim through this and then we'll get into that question. Julia talks a lot about property management, and I think people will find that interesting. But renovating, I actually, a couple of years ago went and got my general contractor's license, which sounds impressive, but in the state of Rhode Island, it was a weekend course and I was suddenly a general contractor. And the reason I did that was because Rhode Island does not allow for just homeowners to pull permits. So I wanted to be able to pull the permits, and I like this stuff anyways. And I was a big DIYer in the first place. And I don't know if we mentioned, although we live in Boston, all our properties are in Providence, Rhode Island. So that's a different conversation. But anyways, a couple things to kind of keep in mind when you're renovating. And this is not just if you're doing it yourself. This is something to talk about with your contractor. This is something to keep in mind as you're being, let's say you're the designer, so to speak, or just walking through a property. These are things we always think about. So doing things that you'll thank yourself later for. So durable materials, making it tenant proof. I mean, can't say that enough. I mean, you got to remember, people are living and abusing these places. I mean, yes, I think it sounds worse than it really is, but it's not their place, right? They know that, and they will put anything down the drain. They will, scratch up the floors. A lot of tenants, unfortunately, just don't care. And if you get the ones that do, that's amazing. And we've been lucky that way, but I prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Reliable mechanicals, I think that's pretty obvious. We don't put sink disposals in just because it's one other thing that can break. We put new appliances in just because we know they're durable and new. We replace usually all the electric and plumbing, and that's specific to our area because the houses are 100 years old. If your house is relatively new, it may, 80s or newer, I would say, you may not need to do that. So that's very specific to our area. We do keypad door locks just to avoid lockouts. So usually on 2 different doors. So if one battery dies, they can still get in, and then we can get all that replaced. So keypads, we've never had a lockout because of that. The design, keep in mind, has to be pretty neutral, timeless, appeal to 90%, be very practical. And that's something we spend a lot of time with. Where are the light switches placed? Where are the outlets? We're very keen on having, especially in the kitchen, having lots of outlets, because how many times have you lived in a place that didn't have that, and how frustrating is it? And we don't want to be in a situation where the tenant is so frustrated with living there, they move out, and they may be a great high paying tenant that we don't want to lose. And I put in this picture good lighting as a part of that, as part of the design. We personally currently rent, funny enough, and we've rented from a lot of places that did not have good practical designs, and we moved out within a year. Safeties and liabilities, that's your classic. Just do everything to avoid a lawsuit in the first place. That's the best defense. You can have LLCs, you can have insurance, you can do all this thing, but do the things to avoid it in the first place. That's the number one. And then DIY first, hiring out. The only thing I want to touch upon here so we can move on is understand the value of your time. Is your time more valuable doing something else, or can someone else get it done faster? If someone can get it done faster, that means you can get it rented, or if you're flipping on the market faster. That's something we learned the hard way. Sometimes you just can't afford to do it yourself. And that's been our case through most of our renovations, where we just had to do it ourselves. But now with our most recent BURR, it was a matter of time, especially with that 12, 13% interest rates. We had to move as fast as possible because it was too costly for us to hold it for an extra month, just because I wanted to do the drywall myself and save, a couple $100.
Amazing. So here's our property management slide. So I'll start with that first question for tenant screening. So what we like to do is we utilize a Google form, which I'm happy to email out if you guys just want a copy of it, but where we look for, okay, how many occupants are going to be in the property? What's your income? Is it that 3 times the rent? What's your credit score? We'll run a full background check, and we'll be able to see, are they delinquent on any payments ever? Or, what is their credit history? Are they paying on time? I always like to say, I'm providing a service as your property manager, as I'm self-managing, I want that mutual level of respect. Tenants want to be treated with respect, and as do I, and as I want my property to be respected. So really providing that extra level of care. I know sometimes you'll read and see online, oh, don't let your tenant know who you are, or that you're the property owner. I don't like that. I like to provide, a white glove service, and I want to make sure, like, for whatever reason, if they hit hard times, I'm the first bill that they pay. Or if they're going to be late, I want them to reach out to me. And, on the East Coast where we're at, we have a 5-day grace period. So if I see that someone's not making their rent latest by the 5th of the month, I want them to have a conversation with me and just text me and say, hey, Julia, I'm sorry. I understand there's a late fee. And this is real life example. My FAFSA's, late. And that's why I'm going to be delinquent on my payment. Can we work something out? And usually that's fine. And lastly is having systems in place. This is so, so important. Property management companies could take 10% of, the income that's coming in per month from, the rent. So what was important to us, especially in the beginning, as we were trying to retain as much of our profit as possible, was self-managing. So a few of tools that I listed on the side here is, Rent Ready. Rent Ready is great. We have all the tenants pay through like ACH payments virtually. It prompts them to, set up auto pay. There's also something that we could do where it helps their credit score. Excuse me. So that's what we use for that. And then any type of maintenance request can also be done through there. Stessa is where we run, all of our accounting, and it's really great, mobile friendly app too. Kevin will be running in and out of Home Depot and Lowe's and have like 100 receipts, and no accountant wants you to just come with a shoe box full of receipts at the end of the year. So we're able to scan them in there and categorize them appropriately. And lastly, we had the best luck listing open units on Zillow. We've done Facebook. We've done everything. The highest quality tenant is going to come from Zillow. And then I guess the last thing I'll say before I open it up to questions, because I'm sure we'll have a few. If in fact someone is, great, but their income might be low, we'll always just, have a co-signer, on the lease if they're below our credit score credentials. So I'll pause for questions.
Well, yeah, I just want to answer, the question directly to what our criteria is. So our criteria typically, and it kind of changes depending, I guess, on how desperate we are to fill that unit, right?
Sure.
Granted, we are willing to miss a month to get a good tenant, like there is nothing worse than getting a bad tenant that you now have to evict. And thankfully, because of all these systems and these criteria, which I'll go over, we haven't had anyone miss payments. We've had a couple like late on the 6th, but that's just because honestly, people forget. And then they immediately send it. So yeah, in terms of the actual numbers, what we do, usually like 650 credit score or higher, and that may seem high. But we'll put that out there just to have people, like, if they're nowhere near that, they're not going to bother applying. We'll also do 3 times the rent, which again can be hard, but usually we set our criteria high and then we use discretion as the different applications come in. What other criteria do we have? I mean, a steady job, of course. And then we noticed, at least in our area in Providence, Rhode Island, that there's families that will try and rent, let's say, 6 people in a 3-bedroom. And I'm sorry, I don't think legally we can even do that, but we'll just avoid that altogether. We ask how many people are living in this unit, because you'll be surprised at how many people they try to stuff into these units. What else?
Yeah, so that's pretty much the basis of it. But yeah, happy to take questions. I see the chat's blowing up a little bit.
Yeah, Eugenia is asking, have you ever tried using pad split? And do you have any opinions about it?
I've honestly never even heard of that. Have you?
No, I've never heard of that.
So you'll have to educate me on that.
All right. Don is asking, if you self-manage, how do you do the repairs? Do you have local consistent handymen, or do you do ID jobbers?
Sure, I can.
How do you ID jobbers by what's needed?
Yeah, so initially, so how we got into real estate in the first place was we house hacked. So meaning we lived in the property and, rented out one of our floors. So we were boots on the ground in the area. And we personally did that for 2.5 years. So while we were still living there, it was very cost effective and very easy just to send my personal handyman over. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would send Kevin over and he would be able to do everything. Now that we removed ourselves from Rhode Island in general and we're in the Massachusetts area, we do hire out and use a handyman. We also, and you can talk about that in a second, but my last comment is also we have a GC now. So a general contractor. So when things are a little bit, more advanced, we trust him and we can just send him over. But you have experience with the handyman.
The way we find them, and this is how I find, and sometimes our handyman's busy, I have to find someone else, right? So I have Google Maps on here. I refuse to use the Google, like when you search like handyman in the Providence area, you're going to get a million sponsored. And I'm not saying they're bad, but they're paying to be there. So I don't know if they're good, right? So what I do is I go onto the actual maps themselves, see where my house is and who's local to the area. And then from there, I can, filter the 4 stars and above. Do they have 1 review or do they have 100 reviews? And that's how I do it. Usually if they're local, they're much more likely to run over there or give you a decent rate or whatever the case is. If I look on the sponsored, I could be hiring someone from Massachusetts, and because we have West Coast people, I don't know, geography, Massachusetts is probably like an hour from Providence. So we could have someone from Massachusetts going down to Providence, which now we're paying for an hour for them to drive there, an hour for them to drive back, however long it takes for them to get it done. Materials, a local person, they'll jump over there. And I've had plenty of handymen say, no, it's a quick job, give me $20. It's super easy. Venmo them, or sometimes they have an actual system. But don't underestimate just going on Google Maps and looking in your local area for anything, whether it's a handyman, contractor, countertops, anything.
One person here is asking, how difficult would it be to transition from a property manager to self-managing? Sounds like you went the other way around, though.
We certainly did. That's a great question. I would check to see if you have like a minimum amount of time, like with that property management company. Like, for example, if they put a tenant in and it's a 12-month lease, I would look into what it would cost you to break that contractual agreement. I think it would really depend. But I think before you ditch your property management company, making sure that you have your go-to people in the area. So for example, when that heating went in December, now we have a plumber that we can just call and that we personally vetted. So I would make sure you have your go-to plumber, electrician, and handyman before you kind of kiss your property manager goodbye. That's would be my best advice.
And it also starts with having good tenants first, I think. Like if you have good tenants in there, your property management company is probably not doing a whole lot, to be honest, and getting paid quite a bit. If you have bad tenants in there, they probably are dealing with a lot of headaches and certainly earning that 10%. So it's kind of, who did they put in there? I mean, if you're starting to screen people and put people in, you might be able to avoid a lot of headaches in the first place.
And I'll just say this, no one's going to care about your property more than you do, right? Yeah. So you really need to make sure that when you're vetting your property management company or trying to pull away, that, you're working with people that are aligned and that are going to drive, your mission and your goals for your property.
All right. Henry is asking, how do you handle rent increases year over year? Do you try to keep them the same? Do you bump them up? What's your philosophy?
Yeah, so you got to set expectations from the get-go. When they first sign the lease, I wouldn't be afraid to say that, hey, just so you know, we do raise, what was the average you think that we do?
5 to 10%.
Yeah.
It kind of depends, honestly. And it's such a case by case basis, but yeah, I'd rather set expectations high and then come in low. There's been people who we never raised because, to be honest, they came in at such a high rate. Surprisingly, we were shocked we got them, and they've been paying for 3 years. And when we look at what else they could buy or rent, we find that honestly, we're pretty on par still, even after 3 years. So we try to be reasonable,
And your tenants are smart. They'll know if they're getting a great deal too. So if you have something that's under market value, I've had that conversation with tenants before too. I'm like, listen, this is under market value. If you were to leave, you're going to be paying $300 to $500 more. So if you stick with me and I'm only raising you $100, that's not a bad deal. So, and
Yeah.
that goes back to being, you know, a boots on the ground landlord in a sense, where you have that relationship with them and that, you know, that face-to-face connection where they're like, all right, Julia, you're right.
Or even if you can't be boots on the ground, like having literal phone calls with them, like, so they know your voice.
Absolutely.
But
All
I want
right.
to jump.
Oh, there's one more question.
Sure.
From Anju about where do you find your rental agreements?
Ooh,
Yeah.
great question.
That's been a mixed bag, honestly. It's been we've rented from a few places now. So I've taken our own leases that people have signed with us. I mean, we've signed with other people and taken, you know, the best out of those and merged them together. We used to use this company called Avail. And I still recommend them. They just got a little expensive for the amount of doors we had because they pay by door. It's great if you only have one or two, but as you get more, it's a little more expensive. But anyways, they had preset ones that were already vetted by lawyers. We have, I think Stessa is actually starting to do that. And by the way, we're not sponsored by any of these companies. These are just what we actually use. But yes, I think Stessa is starting to use it. Or give you rental agreements. But honestly, it was kind of a merging of a bunch of different rental agreements. And I took the best out of everything. And then as we go through different turnovers, you'll hear random things, whether it's something about yard maintenance or something about, you know, you just start to add things in there, or dogs or whatever the case is. You just start to add things in and you get the super long lease, and it's probably ridiculous, but I'd rather have something in there than nothing.
And I'll give you an example. We have one tenant that for some reason, and I swear to God, they're brand new, what are those things called? The fire things that are in the apartments?
Oh, smoke alarms.
Or smoke alarms. Sorry, that's getting tongue twisted. She goes through them like this.
She's gone through like 4 already in a year.
Yeah, which is crazy. So anyways, my point is, as you get more experience and you have these random situations, you'll be able to put in your lease anything over $100 or excessive, you know, use of certain things. You can throw that in, you know, over time.
Yeah. So
all right.
I just want to jump ahead to a quick deal because I know, well, I guess.
Oh, you're right. We only have 5 minutes left. My apologies.
Yeah, sorry. That's the only reason I'm sure there's people on here that wanted to see actual numbers.
Yes, let's get into this.
So here's a BURR deal. So this is a real deal. This is actually our most recent one that we did. Again, BURR is buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. So in this case, again, buying right. This was actually listed for maybe $330,000. And I toured it. It was actually happened to be next to one of the properties we owned. It was a decent property. I mean, it was super dated. You could destroyed. You can see in those top 2 pictures. But from a location standpoint and a bone standpoint, it was a decent property. And I would have loved to own it, I told the realtor, but like the numbers don't work. And that's kind of where I stood with the realtor. It's like the numbers just, I don't make money on this property. Like I can't get into something I don't make money. Long story short, we learned that they needed to close very quickly. So I knew we had a hard money lender in our pocket that was willing to work with us. We were able to offer quote unquote cash. So in the buyer's eyes, they see cash, but behind the scenes, I'm getting a wire transfer from a hard money person into our account. So we were able to close within a week. We were able to, the renovation was costed $58,000. That was hiring a general contractor. And then I did a little bit of work like tiling and things that I knew I could do pretty well. We leveraged actually 100% of this, which is super risky. I don't necessarily recommend it for a lot of people, but it did work out in this case. So it is possible. So we leveraged 80% of it with a hard money and 20% of it with private money. Again, that's just people in your network. We had an interest rate of 12%. We held it for, I don't remember how long, but it was only $12,000 of holding costs.
About 3 months.
Yeah, I think maybe a little less even. But yeah, it was pretty quick turnaround time. All in costs for us, if you add all that up, was $357,000. Long story short, the bank came in after it was redone with the pictures you see on below. We have an appraisal of 430, which if you do the math there, actually I changed the number slightly at the last minute because I realized I didn't account it. So it's not actually 75. I think that number comes out to 73. So $73,000. Now that sounds amazing, but that's not $73,000 in my pocket. In this specific case, because interest rates were high, we had a new interest rate of 8.3, almost 8.4%. We chose not to take money out. So we left money in the deal. So now we have 75K in equity, but keep in mind, we got into this property for nothing. We put 0% of our own money in, and now we suddenly have 75% into equity. So we go around and sell this, or it's just in our net worth. Additionally, we're renting this for $2,900. Our PITI, our principal interest, taxes, and insurance is $2,850. So our rent is covering the mortgage. Now, something to keep in mind, there's always, I mentioned earlier, cash flow. We luckily have other properties that can cover if something goes wrong on this. However, nothing really does go wrong on this one because it was a full gut. It was a new furnace, new everything. The roof was only 5 years old. There really is minimal that can go wrong on this. That doesn't mean it won't go wrong. Anything that can happen will happen. But we have cash flow from another property, or we're willing to pay out of our own pocket because the renter is covering the full mortgage. We're getting principal pay down. We were able to get into a property for free, and we have the appreciation of this house going forward. So in a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, it's going to be worth a lot more than $430,000. And again, we got into it for free. So just because you put no money in your pocket doesn't mean it wasn't a bad, or doesn't mean it was a bad deal.
Right. And then eventually, and who knows, but when rates drop, we'll be able to refinance, and then that margin of cash flow will increase over time as well.
Yeah. So you can always refinance. There could be as many R's as you want on this BURR. You can always refinance I doubt it will go down to 3 again, but if it goes down to 4, 5, even 6, we'll definitely refinance and probably take money out then and go into another deal. We're at time, but I'm happy. We do have one other deal. It is in the slide deck. It's a little more advanced. I'll leave it up to you, Daniel, what you want to do.
If you can go through it quickly, sure.
Sure.
Go for it.
So sorry, I'll fly through this. Feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you have specific questions. I'm happy to talk through it. This was a little bit different. This one we actually did not close on, but we were trying to get under contract like a couple weeks ago. So I thought it was a great example, even in this high interest rate environment. And this one was going to be with a partner. So we had a partner who wanted equity in the partnership. He wanted hands off. So we were going to find the deal, manage the deal, everything. We came up with basically a 50-50 partnership. And this house was in pretty good condition. It was 1966 build, which sounds probably super old to some people, depending on where you invest. But that means the electrical is pretty decent. You could have aluminum, you could have copper, but in this case, it was copper. So that was good. The plumbing was in good condition. And you can see by the picture at the bottom, like it really needed paint, flooring, and new cabinets, which is all cosmetic. That's not that expensive of stuff to do. So it was a 9-unit building. I estimated about $135K of repair. But the upside on that was the property value and appreciation. So again, the appreciation after a year based off the rent increases, a new cap rate of 8%. We are projecting this to be close to 1.2 million. And again, that was based off pretty conservative. And then by year 2, around 1.3. And that was based off an 8 cap rate and just increased rents. And so cap rate is just basically a multiplier of the rents after expenses. Now, what I want to touch upon, I do not expect people to actually look at this in detail. If this gets sent out afterwards, please do. But this is the level of detail we will go into when we're analyzing a deal. Now, this is a 9-unit, so it looks way more complicated. But all it is at the top, you see revenue. We have 9 units there. I have the current rents. The yellow is when we would be renovating. So that's based off of current leases. Some of those leases were recently signed, so they would have been out all the way to May. So it's doing a whole projection for over a year of where rents would be, including expenses, taxes, insurance, water, sewer, landscaping, repairs, everything. You see, I have an NOI. That's before mortgage. We had a short-term loan, and then I estimated a refinance in November. October, but probably close in November on that refinance. We'd have a much better rate at that point. I think I projected maybe a 7.5%. So I was being pretty conservative on all that. And the biggest takeaway here is, we were going to lose money in the beginning because we were renovating. But if we held it long enough, at the very end, we would have been getting about $4,000 in cash flow on top of we're now sitting on a $1.3 million property. So we gained about a couple $100,000 in equity. And our partner would have got by year 2 a 38% return. And those again are pretty conservative numbers, and that's only with a 50% stake in there. I mean, you can imagine if you hold this, and that's only year 2. You can imagine if you hold it for much longer, you sell when the market's high, however you want to handle it, you can end up in a pretty good position. And this is a recent deal in today's market with high interest rates, high purchases. They are out there. This is a much bigger building, but the same thing can be said for a 2-family or a 3-family. You just have to be willing to hold it and renovate it and put some value add.
All right, everybody, could you take yourselves off of mute and thank Kevin and Julia for coming in and speaking to us today?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Julia.
Yeah.
Great presentation.
That was
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good presentation.
Sorry, I rushed through a lot of that. We have our, let's see if I can. Yeah, we have our Instagram, our email there. Our Instagram is definitely best to reach out to us. We can answer any questions, go into more details. We have so many other examples. We don't sell anything, so don't think we're trying to send you there to buy a course or something. We just love talking about real estate. So, and then we were recently on the Bigger Pockets podcast, which we get into some other things. But yeah.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please reach out.
Thank you. And I will say, getting a hold of you on Instagram was a lot easier than email, which you're probably the first person I brought in that's the case.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we're you know how it is. The email gets overflowed, and it's definitely a fault. But
yeah, great presentation. Thank you so much, and have a
Thank you,
wonderful
guys.
Cinco de Mayo weekend.
Yes, you guys as well.